trees are actually planted each year. And the Florida Forest Service says that for every one tree that's cut down, 5 seedlings are replanted in its place. So since most of the trees that are replanted are pines, it's worth taking a closer look at some of the pines. And I think he mentioned that she was interested in this. So this is a list of all the pines that are native to Florida, that occur in Florida. The ones I put in orange are the ones that occur in Charlotte County. And I won't focus too much on sand pine because it doesn't really occur too much. But I also wanted to focus on what aren't pines, and I think this group's probably pretty educated on what is not pines. So Australian pines, the so-called Norfolk Island pines, which are actually hoop pines. Those are all southern hemisphere plants, whereas our pines, anything in the genus Pinus, is from the northern hemisphere. So I thought I would just throw that in there, but I'm a pretty smart group. So these are teeny little maps, I know that, but the most widespread pine species, as you can see in Florida, is the slash pine. And I guess as a little diversion, I probably have some time. So Jennifer mentioned that Florida panthers and Texas panthers, they're really the same species. What's the scientific name?
Kumakakoa.
Okay, so what are slash pines and South Florida slash pines? Pinus eliatii, right? So the typical slash pine is considered variety eliatii. The South Florida slash pine is considered variety densa. So why don't I have a map on there that shows the range of South Florida slash pine? Well, that's even among botanists and biologists, including the sorts that I got this from, the Institute for Systematic Botany, which is like the main botany gurus in Florida. They don't consider South Florida slash pine separate from the typical slash pine. So again, it's like the cats, you know, it's kind of splitting hairs. I mean, it's basically the same pine species. Although I am going to show you that there are some differences. But again, not everybody recognizes those. So most of the pines that occur in Charlotte County are South Florida slash pines. It's this variety densa. I'm going with the variety densa. As you can see, there's Charlotte County. We are at the very southern end, very southern tip of where Longleaf pine occurs.
We're in Sarasota County.
Oh, we're in Sarasota County?
But it's close enough.
It's close enough.
Right down the
Just
street.
barely cross the street.
It's down the street, yeah.
Yes, it was.
Common as all get out.
Sorry. Close enough.
But if anybody is from Charlotte County, there are a few longleaf pines, and it is really cool to be, you know, at the very side. I mean, I lived in North Carolina, and so, yeah, I realize if anybody needs to go, feel free to get up and leave too, because we're probably running over on time. But it's neat to be where I was in North Carolina, the very, very northern end of the range, and then also to be down here at the southern end of the range. But, so how would you distinguish, if you happen to be in the edge of the range, how would you distinguish South Florida slash pine from the longleaf pine? Well, some of the key differences, and this is a key from the flora of North America, but some of the key differences that separate slash pines from longleaf pines are the size, shape, and color of the terminal bud, the size and appearance of the cones, and the length of the leaves. There's also some characteristics that distinguish the typical or northern slash pine variety eliatii from variety densa, which is the South Florida slash pine. These include the presence or absence of a grass stage, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. Also, the number of leaves in a fascicle or bunch. You know, pine leaves there's usually 2 or 3 bunched together. Those are called fascicles. And also the location within the state. So all of these are characteristics that are important to consider because South Florida slash pine can be confusing because it can look like a longleaf pine.
You're saying that the slash pine does not have a grass stage?
South Florida slash pine has a grass stage, but the typical variety of Pinus eliatii, the northern slash pine, does not have a grass stage. So
That's interesting.
it's interesting, yeah. So the crown on a mature South Florida slash pine, and again, a lot of this is generalizations. It's not something I necessarily look for in the field, but these are generalizations that can help others. They can be rounded or kind of flattened, and longleaf pines tend to have a more rounded crown. Although, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Both are pretty much similar in terms of height. In our area, they tend to top out around 60 feet, although longleaf pines can get up to 100 feet. The branching pattern is somewhat different. So South Florida slash pine has branches that are sort of spreading and ascending, whereas longleaf pine are more spreading, kind of descending, but with the tips sort of curled up. And you can kind of see, like on this branch, how it sort of goes down and then kind of goes up at the very tip. So that can be a helpful thing to look at. Both species are very long-lived trees. They can live upwards of 200 years. Some longleafs 400 years old, although it's doubtful we're going to see those. I'm not sure that bark is the best way to go. They both have really thick, platy bark. And that serves to protect the tree against fire. I think the bark on South Florida slash pine tends to have a little more of these flaky plates, whereas on longleaf pine it's a little more papery. In either case, though, the bark on both trees can kind of flake off when there's a fire, and that helps to sort of protect them against the heat. It disperses the heat, so it can protect them during a fire. There is a big difference, though, in terms of leaves and leaf lengths, as I mentioned before. South Florida slash pine, the needles tend to be anywhere from 6 to 8 inches, whereas on longleaf pines, they can be anywhere from 8 to 18 inches long, so quite a bit longer. And longleaf pines tend to appear, I think, as more of like a starburst kind of thing, and that they don't seem to be quite as clustered as South Florida slash pine. So it can help, not often are you fortunate enough to have both in the field side by side. So you usually have one or the other, and you're scratching your head trying to figure out which one is which. But another really good thing, and a lot of times the branches are way beyond your reach and you can't see it, or it's the wrong time of the year. But South Florida slash pine tends to have smaller buds, and they tend to be more of a silvery gray, silvery brown. They're short, usually less than an inch, although like now they're starting to expand and get larger. But on longleaf pine, they're much chunkier, they're more white, silvery white, and they're usually more than an inch or an inch and a half in length. So usually pretty distinctive, and those are great features. And of course, good old standby are the cones. Obviously, the longleaf pine cones are the largest of all the pines that occur in Florida, or Louisiana for that matter. The slash pine cones are anywhere from 3.5 to maybe 7 inches in length. There's an overlap in size in the longleafs. They range from 6 to 10 inches in size. But I don't know. I think this is, to me, one of the really great characters, leaf length, buds, and these pine cones. They just have huge, really great pine cones, real decorative ones. One other thing to note is that on slash pines, they'll start producing cones as early as 10 to 15 years of age. But on longleaf pines, it often takes 30 years before they'll start producing.
Wow. Well, in RCW, they won't use slash pines, right? Only
Yeah, they will.
They will?
They will.
Okay.
Okay, so I mentioned the grass stage about pines before. So I'll kind of explain what it is and why it's important. Basically what it is, and I took this, oh my gosh, didn't mean for that. So I took this one as I said, in Norfolk the other day, and I think this South Florida slash pines kind of come out of its sort of grass stage, but that was as good as I could get for a recent photo. But this one, a longleaf pine, it does look like a clump of grass, doesn't it? I mean, basically what you've got here is just a very thickened stem with a really dense whorl of leaves. And the idea behind that is that you've got this real tight cluster of leaves with the bud tucked down in there. So when a fire sweeps through here, it's going to burn off all these needles, including the green ones, and that's going to keep the bud sort of insulated from the damaging effects of a fire. And these pines have all, basically adapted to growing. They've evolved over time to living in these fire-prone, fire-dependent habitats. So they've adapted over time to compensate for that by having this grass stage that protects the bud. Both of these can last, the grass stage can last anywhere from 1 to 7 years, and it really just kind of depends on the competition among other plants or resources as to when they start bolting and actually produce a stem. And actually, if these are killed by a fire, top killed by a fire, they do have an ability to resprout from some dormant buds that lie at the root collar. So there's some backup plan, I guess.
Are they both serotinous?
Both serotinous.
Are they serotinous, both of them? Where the cones won't open unless there's a fire?
No, they will.
They don't have to have the fire.
They don't have to.
Okay.
So, like most of the old-growth trees that were carted away, and isn't that just an amazing?
Oh my
what kind
God.
of tree?
Sad.
What kind of tree is that?
I don't know what species it was, but it was a pine tree.
Sad.
Yeah. I've been in cypress swamps where I've seen some, I guess they haven't even been that big, but I see some big cypress logged in places in Collier County, and I think, wow, that was an old tree. But I've never seen a pine tree that was that big. And I don't think that was Photoshop. But anyway, our native southern pines have really become a commercially important tree species the world over. Both longleaf and slash pine have very heavy wood that's ideal for construction for homes, flooring, for furniture. They have a high resin content, which really made them ideal for railroad ties, things like that. So what is resin? Well, it's a really sticky, gummy substance that helps protect trees basically from attacks by insects and other pathogens. And by sealing over wounds, the resins can help prevent decay and minimize water loss during droughts. And, oh no, I did it again. So with the red cockaded woodpecker, they oftentimes have the sap, or not sap, but resin. It's often running, and it can help prevent things like snakes from managing to get up to their nest. So they use it to their advantage by keeping predators out of their nest. I don't know if you've ever seen a snake climb a tree, but it's a pretty amazing thing. They're just, anyway.
They hit that and they fall off.
Well, it's a sticky stuff. It's like, they don't want to get anywhere near. It's like fly paper to a snake. So, and the resin was pretty much collected by tapping the trees. It must have been a very difficult job in some really remote places. But basically what they did was they cut these V-shaped notches into a tree. You've heard about cat-faced pine trees before. And then all the resin was collected in little cups or pots at the bottom. And you could tap a tree for about 20 years. That was typically about the lifespan before they came back and cut the trees for lumber.
What's the resin used for?
Different.
Lots of different things. One of them is when you heat pine wood to really high temperatures, you create charcoal. And the resulting byproducts are water and pine tar. And these are all part of the naval stores that we talk about: resin, pine tar, pine pitch. Pine tar is often used as a wood preservative, as a water sealant for boats and tarps, and even ropes in fishing boats. They use it for producing soaps and even medicines. And then when you heat the pine tar a little bit more to evaporate some of the water, you end up with something called pitch. And pitch is what they use to waterproof boats, barrels, and other types of wooden containers and roofs. And then when you take the resin and you distill it with a steam distiller, turpentine is evaporated off and then collected in a condenser. And turpentine is really used for an amazing number of things, and it's still used for quite a number of things.
Attention library patrons. The library will be closing in 30 minutes. If you need a library card, please visit one of our service desks now. Internet users, internet stations will shut down automatically at 7:50.
So turpentine is used for a lot of ailments. They use it in a lot of medicines, like for respiratory problems, common cold. They even use it to treat tuberculosis. Turpentine, in the 1800s anyway, turpentine was traditionally used in paints as a solvent for producing varnish. Turpentine is used today in the chemical industry as a base for producing solvents, cleaners, insecticides, and fragrances. I even found that it's used for creating artificial flavors like lemon, peppermint, and nutmeg, as well as in cosmetics. I mean, who knew? So rosin is another a byproduct of turpentine. It's what you get after you distill off the turpentine. You're left with rosin, and that's used by string instrument musicians. Anybody that's ever played violin probably know that. It's also used in sealing waxes, varnishes, printing inks, adhesives, medications, different foods, and even for electronic soldering. So some really odd but very diverse uses. And I think it's really amazing that there's so many different uses for pine-related products, everyday uses that we don't even think of, other than like wood, different types of wood mulch and pine straw. And I think, mulches are definitely good. If anybody's got a pine tree where they've got, like my neighbor has pines and all the needles come down, and I'm like salivating for that pine straw. Because if you got it, rake it up and use it in your garden. It's really great. But I should point out too that commercial raking of pine plantations and pine forests, and most of that's done up in North Florida, can actually be pretty damaging to a forest ecosystem, because a lot of plants and animals rely on that pine mulch, and a lot of that goes into improving soil health. So, I guess like anything, there's trade-offs, and you really need to consider that when you're using those in your yard. So pines have a lot of benefits for us. So I think the question then is can we live without pines? And I think the answer is yes, and the answer is no at the same time. And I think, is it practical for a lot of us to have pines in our yards? I mean, as I said, I came to Northport and I kind of explored around the area, and I think a lot of home lots are getting smaller. I don't even think we can support a lot of canopy pine trees, let alone live oaks as canopy trees. I think our lots are just too much smaller. A lot of folks live in certain neighborhoods. I mean, I live in town, and I don't think I could, as much as I'd like to have one, I don't think that I could. We live in a lot of planned communities that won't let us plant those things either. So I think the question then becomes, can we live without pine forests? So that gets us to another thing, another question here. I think it's my last question. But how much of Florida's drinking water do you think is filtered through a forest? Well, if you said 80%, again, this is from the Florida Forest Service, but if you said 80%, you're correct. So I think it's important that we keep Florida forests healthy and productive. It's good for the environment, it's good for the plants, it's good for the animals that live in the forest. So remember that Florida ranks 7th out of 50 in terms of biological diversity. And I think to bring this point home, the Longleaf pine forests, it's one of the most ecologically diverse habitats in the United States and the world. Some people have likened it to tropical rainforests in terms of biodiversity. Some biologists have found that there's more than 900 different plant species that live in Longleaf pine forests. And many of those are endemic species, like the indigo snake that occur, well, I was going to say like the indigo snake that occurs nowhere else in the world, but actually indigo snakes do occur in other places in the United States. But a lot of the endemic species live in Longleaf pine forest. So among vascular plants, like the ones that I have pictured here is the Florida clamshell orchid and the cardinal air plant. Florida ranks number 6 in terms of plant diversity. We also rank 6th in terms of risk as well. As you can see from here, that we're also number 1 east of the Mississippi River. So, we're tops in terms of number of plants, but also in risk. And so that's good in a way, but also not so good. Same ranking, as far as birds go. We're the highest state with bird diversity east of the Mississippi, but we also have the greatest risk for our bird species. If you just consider the Longleaf